The night was bitter and cruel. Snow fell without mercy, covering the ground in a white sheet that looked calm but carried death within it. The wind howled like a hungry beast, tearing through the trees and rattling the frozen branches. In that endless cold, a young alien girl stumbled through the darkness. Her steps were slow, heavy, and weak, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow her. In her arms she carried two tiny newborn twins. Their skin was pale, their little cries almost too soft to hear against the storm. Wrapped only in thin cloth, their bodies shook in the freezing air. The girl held them close, whispering weak words, trying to give them warmth with her own failing strength. She was not just tired, she was broken. Her feet bled from walking barefoot in the snow. Her face was pale, her lips turning blue. Her body was weak from hunger, but still she moved forward. She had no choice. She could not stop, not here, not in this endless wasteland. She had to try. She had to keep her children alive, even if her own life ended tonight. The world around her was silent except for the storm. No houses, no lights, no signs of life. Only the endless cold stretching on and on. Every step felt like the last. Her breath came out in sharp gasps, turning into clouds of white mist. She clutched her babies tighter, whispering, "Please stay with me. Please don't leave me." But the babies were fading. Their cries were weaker now. Their small hands, once full of life, were turning stiff from the cold. Tears rolled down her face and froze against her skin. She knew the truth. She was not meant to survive. She had been cast out, abandoned, and left to die. Her people had called her cursed. They had called her children a burden, and so they threw her into the snow, believing the storm would finish the work. They thought she would be gone by morning, nothing left but a memory swallowed by the wind. But the girl refused to let it end so easily. She refused to let her babies be taken by the cold. Still, her body grew weaker with every breath. She fell to her knees, clutching the twins against her chest. The snow bit into her skin, but she could not rise again. Her strength was gone. She rocked slowly back and forth, whispering lullabies in a trembling voice. The sound was soft, almost broken, but it was all she had left to give. "Sleep, my little ones. Don't be afraid. I am here." The sky above was covered in black clouds. No stars to guide her, no moon to watch over her. It felt as if the universe itself had turned away. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of life slipping from her. Maybe this was the end. Maybe the snow would claim them, just as her people wished. And then, footsteps. They were faint at first, almost lost in the sound of the wind. Crunch, crunch. Someone was walking across the frozen ground. The girl's eyes opened in fear. Who could it be? More hunters from her people? Strangers who might finish the job? She pressed her babies tighter against her chest, her heart racing despite her weakness. The sound grew closer. A shadow moved through the snowstorm, tall and strong. The figure walked with steady steps, carrying something on his back. The girl blinked, trying to see through the storm. It was not one of her kind. The face that appeared from the snow was different. Rough, human, with eyes sharp as steel and a beard frosted by the wind. A human. Out here in the middle of nowhere. The man stopped when he saw her. His eyes widened at the sight of the alien girl, collapsed in the snow, clutching two tiny children. For a moment, neither of them moved. The storm howled between them, but their eyes locked, hers filled with fear and sorrow, his with shock and something else. Something she could not name. The girl tried to speak, but her lips only trembled. A weak sound escaped her throat, more a whisper than a word. "Help." The man did not answer right away. His face was hard, his body tense. Humans and aliens were not friends. Helping her could bring him danger, even death. Yet he did not walk away. His gaze shifted to the babies, their small faces blue with cold, their cries barely alive. Something changed in his eyes then. The hard look softened, replaced with something human, something powerful. He stepped closer, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The girl tried to pull back, her strength failing her. She did not know if she could trust him. She did not know if the stranger was her salvation or the end. The man bent down, his shadow covering her and the twins. He looked at the children once more, then at her pale, fading face. His jaw tightened, the storm raged around them. The snow fell thicker as if trying to bury them all, and in that moment the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his choice. Would he walk away, or would he save them? The man stood in the storm, staring down at the fragile scene before him. The alien girl lay in the snow, Her arms wrapped tightly around the two newborns, her body shivering like a dying flame. Her lips moved again, and this time he heard it more clearly. Just one word, broken and desperate. Help. His heart clenched. He had seen many things in his hard life. He had seen cruelty, hunger, even war. But never had he seen something like this. A young mother abandoned in the cold, fighting death with nothing but her will. The twins cried weakly, their voices thin and fading. Their breaths came in short, sharp gasps. He knew that if he turned his back now, they would not live until morning. For a moment, the man hesitated. He had learned long ago that helping others, especially those not of his kind, often brought trouble. Aliens and humans did not trust each other. Many times they were enemies. If anyone discovered he had saved her, he could be punished, even hunted. His cabin was hidden, his life quiet. He had chosen it that way to escape the noise of a broken world. Saving her would destroy that peace, but still, he could not look away. Something inside him stirred. Perhaps it was the sound of the babies crying. Perhaps it was the way the girl still held them close, as if her own body was a shield against death. Or maybe it was the memory of his own past, a memory he thought he had buried long ago. He remembered loss. He remembered a family he could not save. And now, here before him was a chance to do something different. With a low growl of determination, he bent down. The girl flinched, her body trembling, but she had no strength to resist. Carefully, he slid one arm beneath her and the other beneath the twins. He lifted them all three into his arms. They were light, too light. He could feel how fragile they were. He pressed them close against his chest, letting his own body heat shield them from the storm. The girl gasped softly, her eyes wide with confusion. She had not expected kindness. Not from a stranger. Not from a human. For a moment she wanted to speak, to ask why. But her voice failed, and darkness closed in at the edges of her sight. She fell into unconsciousness, her head resting against his shoulder. The man did not waste another moment. He turned, his boots digging into the snow, and began to walk. The storm pushed against him, the wind biting, but he moved with steady strength. Each step felt heavy, but his arms did not falter. The children whimpered, but their cries softened as he pressed them close. Far across the forest, hidden between old trees, stood his cabin. It was small, built by his own hands, with thick walls and a fire that never died. He had lived alone there for years, away from towns and away from people. Now for the first time he carried life inside its walls that was not his own. The door groaned as he pushed it open. Warmth spilled out, the glow of fire waiting within. He stepped inside quickly, shutting the storm away. The sudden change made the babies stir. Their tiny hands moved, reaching for warmth. He set them gently on a pile of blankets near the fire, then laid the mother beside them. For a moment he simply stood there, breathing hard. His chest rose and fell with exhaustion, but his eyes stayed locked on the scene. He could not deny it. There was something powerful about the sight. 3 strangers brought to his cabin by fate, fragile, helpless, and now under his care. He knelt beside them. Carefully he touched the baby's cheeks. Their skin was ice cold, but they were still alive. He fed the fire more wood, making the flames roar higher, throwing heat into the room. Then he pulled more blankets and covered the little ones. The girl shifted slightly, her lips moving as if caught in a dream. He could hear her whisper, soft as the wind. "Don't take them, please." His jaw tightened. Whoever had abandoned her must have been heartless. He could see the marks of pain on her body, the weakness, the hunger, the despair. Yet she had not given up. Even with death around her, she had chosen to fight for her children. He could respect that. Slowly, the man sat down beside the fire. His rough hands rubbed together, warming himself, but his eyes never left the 3. He wondered what story lay behind them. Why had she been left to die? Why were the twins unwanted? And why had fate pushed them across his path on this night? Questions filled his mind, but answers would come later. For now there was only one truth. They were alive. And he had chosen to keep them that way. As the flames danced, he looked at the girl again. She was alien, yes, but in her face he saw something familiar. Fear, hope, love. Things that crossed the barrier of species, things that belonged to all living hearts. He leaned back, his voice low but steady. "You're safe now," he whispered, though she could not hear. Outside, the storm roared louder, trying to claw through the cabin walls. But inside, for the first time in many hours, there was warmth. There was breath. There was life. And yet, deep inside, the man knew this was only the beginning. Saving them had been the easy part. Keeping them safe, that would bring danger he could not yet imagine. The fire cracked, shadows danced across the walls, and the night moved on. 3 lives had been bound together by the cold. What came next would shake them all. The cabin was small but alive with warmth. The fire in the stone hearth burned brightly, crackling and filling the air with the smell of smoke and pine wood. The storm outside continued to scream against the walls, but inside there was shelter, light, and the fragile hope of survival. The human man moved quickly, his hands rough but careful. He placed the newborn twins close to the fire, wrapping them in soft blankets he had kept for the long winters. Their tiny bodies twitched, their breath sharp and uneven, but already the warmth was starting to color their pale skin. He fed them drops of warm milk from a cloth, and though it was slow, the children accepted it, their cries fading into soft whimpers. Beside them lay their mother. The alien girl was still unconscious, her face pale and lips cracked. Her breathing was shallow, almost fragile. The man set a wet cloth against her forehead and covered her with a thick blanket. He studied her closely. She looked so young, not much older than a child herself. Her hair was dark and tangled, her skin marked by frostbite, but even in her broken state there was something strong about her. She had not let go of her children even at the edge of death. The man sat back staring at the scene. He had not asked for this. He had not expected to carry strangers into his life. Yet here they were, in his home, alive because of his choice. His mind wrestled with questions. Why was she left in the snow? Who wanted her gone? And what would happen if her people came looking for her? He rubbed his forehead, trying to push the thoughts away. For now, all that mattered was keeping them alive until morning. Hours passed. The storm eased slowly, though the wind still whispered at the door. Inside the cabin, time moved differently. The man fed the fire, checked the twins, and gave water to the mother. At last, near dawn, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light of the fire. For a moment, she looked confused, unsure if she was still alive. Then her gaze fell on her children, warm and breathing beside her. Her chest rose sharply and a tear slid down her cheek. She reached weakly toward them, touching their small hands as if to make sure they were real. "You're safe," the man said, his voice deep but gentle. The girl turned her head, her eyes locking on him. Fear flashed first, then confusion. She struggled to sit up, but her body was too weak. Why did you save us?" she whispered. Her voice was soft, broken, but filled with suspicion. The man frowned. He had no easy answer. "Because you needed saving," he said simply. Her lips trembled. "Humans don't help my kind. They hunt us." He leaned closer, his eyes steady. "I don't care what others do. I care about what's right. And leaving you in the snow, that would have been wrong." For a moment, silence filled the cabin. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the air. The girl studied his face, searching for lies, but all she saw was truth. Slowly, her shoulders relaxed. She nodded weakly, pulling the blankets closer. "My name is Lyra," she said softly. The man hesitated, then gave his own. "Daniel." Lyra repeated the name as if testing it on her tongue. Then her eyes dropped to her twins. "They would have died without you." Daniel did not answer. He only nodded, though inside his heart twisted. He remembered holding his own child once, long ago, before life tore it away from him. The memory hurt, but it also gave him strength. Perhaps fate had given him a second chance, not to save his past, but to protect this fragile present. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, resting. Then she spoke again, her words heavy. "You don't understand. By helping me, you've put yourself in danger." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Danger from who?" Her voice dropped lower, as if afraid the very walls would hear. "My people. They cast me out. They said my children were cursed. If they find us, they won't stop until we're dead. And anyone with us, we'll die too." The words hung in the air like a shadow. Daniel's jaw tightened. He was no stranger to threats, no stranger to fear. But as he looked at Lyra and at the twins sleeping in peace, something inside him hardened. "Let them come," he said firmly. "If they want you dead, they'll have to go through me first." Lyra stared at him, shocked. No one had ever spoken such words for her before. She saw no hesitation in his eyes, only fire. She wanted to believe him, but doubt still lived in her heart. Could one man stand against a people who had already cast her aside? The fire burned brighter, casting their shadows against the cabin walls. Lyra held her twins close, whispering their names for the first time in the presence of another. Daniel listened quietly, committing the sound to memory. Outside, the storm had passed, but the forest was not silent. Somewhere beyond the trees, voices whispered, shadows moved. The hunters had begun their search, and though Daniel did not yet know it, by opening his door to Lyra and her children, he had stepped onto a path that would change not only his life, but the fate of many more. The night was over, but the true danger was only beginning. The fire still burned strong inside the cabin, but the warmth did little to ease the heavy silence that followed Lyra's warning. Daniel sat near the flames, sharpening the blade of his axe with slow, steady strokes. His eyes stayed fixed on her, waiting. Lyra cradled her newborn twins in her arms, rocking them gently, her face pale but her voice calm. It was clear she carried a truth she had hidden for too long. At last, Daniel broke the silence. "Tell me, why did they cast you out? Why would they call your children cursed?" Lyra lowered her head, her dark hair falling over her face. For a long time, she did not answer. She kissed her babies' foreheads as if drawing courage from their small breaths. Then, in a voice filled with both pain and steel, she began. "In my world, bloodlines mean everything," she whispered. "My people live by strict laws. Who you are allowed to love, who you can marry, even who your children may be, it is all decided by the council. They say it keeps the clan strong. They say it keeps our kind pure, but She paused, her eyes glistening. "I broke their law." Daniel's hand froze on the axe. His voice was low. "How?" Her lips trembled. "I fell in love with someone from another clan. A man they said was my enemy. We kept it secret, but the truth always finds a way. When I became with child, the council saw it as betrayal. They said my babies were a curse born from forbidden blood, and when their father died in the war, I was left with no shield, no protection. So they took me in the night and left me to die in the snow." The fire cracked loudly, as if echoing the cruelty of her words. Daniel clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. He had seen injustice before, but this was worse than anything he could imagine. Condemning a mother and her newborns for something as simple as love. They were willing to kill children. Daniel muttered darkly. Their own blood. Lyra's eyes burned with quiet sorrow. To them, it was not murder. It was cleansing. They believed removing me would erase the stain. And if I survived? She shook her head. They promised to hunt me forever. Daniel set down his axe and leaned forward, his gaze sharp. And now they'll come here. Lyra nodded. Yes, they will not rest until they find us. They are skilled hunters, trained to track without leaving a trace. They'll move like shadows through the trees. And when they come... She trailed off, her arms tightening protectively around her twins. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. The firelight flickered across his face, showing both anger and resolve. Then he stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the cabin wall. Let them come, he said, his voice hard as iron. This is my home, and I will not let anyone take it or them. Lyra's breath caught. No one had ever stood for her before. No one had ever dared to challenge the council's will. She studied him, searching for hesitation, but she found only strength. Still, fear gnawed at her heart. You don't understand, she whispered. They don't stop. They don't forgive. Even if you fight them, even if you drive them away, more will come. They will never end their hunt. Daniel turned his gaze to the door where the wind howled faintly beyond the wood. Then we'll make sure they regret ever starting. The silence stretched again, but this time it was filled with something heavier than fear. It was filled with determination. Daniel began preparing, gathering supplies, extra wood for the fire, weapons, and food. Lyra watched him, torn between hope and dread. Her twins stirred, their tiny fingers clutching at her blanket. She bent low, whispering softly to them in her language. Then she looked at Daniel again. You could still walk away. If you turn me out now, they might not harm you. You don't have to do this. Daniel paused, then faced her. His eyes held an old pain, a wound deeper than words. Once I did walk away, he said quietly. I lost everything because of it. I won't make that mistake again. The weight of his words pressed into her heart. She did not know what sorrow he carried, but she saw that it had shaped him into something unbreakable. She wanted to argue, to protect him from her fate, but the words caught in her throat. Outside, the forest shifted. A branch snapped. The distant call of a bird cut too sharply through the night, as if forced. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound. His instincts sharpened instantly. He crossed the room, pulled a rifle from the wall, and checked its chamber. "They're closer than I thought," he muttered. Lyra's blood ran cold. She clutched her twins tightly, her heart hammering. She had warned him, but still she prayed silently that the hunters would not find them tonight. Daniel moved to the window and peered out into the dark forest. For a moment nothing stirred. The snow lay heavy on the ground, untouched. The trees stood like silent guards. But then, a flicker. A shadow moved between the trunks, swift and quiet. His grip on the rifle tightened. "They're here," he whispered. Lyra's breath shook as her eyes went wide with terror. She pulled the twins close, whispering a promise that she would not lose them. Not tonight. The fire burned hotter, its light glowing against the cabin walls. Daniel took his position by the door, every muscle ready. The storm outside was gone, but in its place came something far more dangerous, and so, as the night deepened, the truth stood clear. The hunters had come, and the battle for survival was about to begin. The night outside was too quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the forest buried in thick snow, yet the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, watchful, filled with the sense that unseen eyes waited just beyond the trees. Daniel stood by the cabin door, rifle in hand, his body tense. Lyra clutched her twins against her chest, her wide eyes fixed on him. Every crackle of the fire, every whisper of wind against the wood made her flinch. "They are here," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can feel them," Daniel did not reply. He scanned the window, his sharp eyes searching the forest. For a long moment there was nothing. Then movement. A shadow darted between the trees, swift and low. Another appeared on the opposite side, barely visible against the dark. They were circling, closing in, waiting for their chance. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had fought men before, but these were no ordinary raiders. These were hunters trained to kill without sound, without mercy. His instincts screamed that this would not be easy. Still he stood his ground. Suddenly a soft sound broke the silence inside the cabin. It was faint, but sharp enough to cut through the night. The cry of a child. One of the twins stirred, releasing a small wail. Lyra's heart sank. She rocked them gently, whispering in her tongue, trying to hush the sound, but it was too late. Outside, the shadows stopped moving. Then slowly they turned toward the cabin. Daniel's breath hardened. They heard. Lyra's grip on her babies tightened. Fear spread through her chest like fire. "You can still leave," she whispered. "If they find me alone, they may spare you." Daniel shook his head, his voice steady. "Not a chance." The first strike came suddenly. A sharp crack echoed as something slammed into the wooden wall, shaking the cabin. Daniel spun toward the noise, rifle raised. An arrow tipped with steel jutted out of the wood, inches from where Lyra sat. She gasped, her body curling protectively over her twins. Then came another sound. A heavy thud against the roof. Snow slid down, but above it, footsteps creaked softly. One of the hunters had climbed onto the cabin. Daniel raised the rifle and fired. The gunshot thundered, shaking the small room. A shadow leapt from the roof, rolling into the snow outside. A muffled cry followed, then silence. The others did not retreat. They moved faster, their shapes appearing at the windows. A hand reached inside, clawed fingers scraping against the wood. Daniel swung the butt of his rifle, smashing it back. Glass cracked, shards falling across the floor. Lyra pressed herself and the children against the far wall, her eyes wide with terror. Her whisper carried across the room. "They won't stop, Daniel. They will burn this place if they have to." Daniel's voice was cold and steady. "Then I'll fight until there's nothing left to burn." He grabbed his axe with his free hand and stood at the door. Another thud shook the wood. They were trying to force their way inside. He braced himself, his body rigid. The door burst open with a crash. Two hunters lunged through, their bodies covered in dark armor, their eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. They moved with inhuman speed, blades flashing in their hands. Daniel roared and swung the axe. The first hunter fell back with a cry, blood staining the snow outside the threshold. The second rushed forward, blade aimed at Daniel's chest. He twisted, firing the rifle point blank. The blast shook the room. The hunter dropped, motionless, but there were more. Shadows flooded the edges of the cabin, their voices hissing in their alien tongue. Lyra clutched her twins tighter, her body trembling. She had seen her people's cruelty before, but never had she seen someone stand against them. Daniel breathed hard, his muscles burning, but he stood firm. He knew he could not hold forever, but he also knew this. As long as he stood, they would not touch her. The hunters outside whispered among themselves, circling again. They had lost two, but they were not afraid. They would wait for their chance for the moment his strength wavered. Inside, the firelight flickered across the walls, throwing their shadows long and thin. Lyra whispered to her children, her voice breaking. "Stay quiet, my loves. Stay safe. He fights for us." Daniel tightened his grip on the axe, his rifle now empty. He stood in the doorway, staring into the dark forest. Snow fell silently, covering the bodies of the fallen. The night was not over, and then another sound, deeper this time. The howl of a horn carried through the trees. More were coming. Dozens, maybe more. Daniel's heart pounded. He had faced enemies before, but never numbers like this. He glanced back at Lyra, who stared at him with wide, terrified eyes. "They won't stop," she whispered again. "They will come until we are gone." Daniel raised his axe high, his shadow stretching across the cabin. His voice was low but filled with fire. "Then they'll learn what it means to fight a human who has nothing left to lose." The forest fell silent again, as if listening. The next attack had not yet come, but it was close. The hunters were in the dark, watching, waiting. The battle for the cabin had only begun. The horn's echo faded into the night, leaving behind a silence more dangerous than noise. Daniel stood in the doorway, axe in hand, his breath rising in clouds against the cold. His cabin, his only home, had become a fortress under siege. The bodies of two hunters already lay in the snow, but more shadows moved beyond the tree line. Dozens of glowing eyes watched him from the darkness. Inside, Lyra sat with her back against the far wall, clutching her twins tightly. Their tiny whimpers filled the cabin, a fragile sound against the storm of danger outside. Her face was pale, her heart racing. She had never imagined a human would fight for her, not when her own people had turned against her. Daniel's mind raced. He knew he couldn't hold forever, but he also knew surrender was not an option. His instincts, sharpened by years of surviving harsher fights than most men could endure, told him one thing. If he fell, so would they. And that was not acceptable. The first wave came quickly. 3 hunters broke from the shadows, sprinting across the snow with blades drawn. Their bodies moved like shadows, silent and fast. Daniel waited until the first stepped into the doorway, then swung his axe in a brutal arc. Steel met flesh and the hunter dropped instantly. The second lunged forward, striking with a spear. Daniel caught the shaft with one hand, twisting hard. The weapon snapped, and with his other hand he drove the axe down. The third came from the side, slipping past him into the cabin. Lyra gasped, shielding her twins. The hunter raised his blade, but Daniel moved faster. With a roar, he threw his body into the intruder, slamming him against the wall. The blade clattered to the floor. Daniel struck again, and silence followed. The cabin smelled of smoke and blood. The fire hissed, sparks flying as if in rhythm with the chaos. Daniel wiped sweat and frost from his brow, breathing hard. But there was no time to rest. More hunters circled outside, their eyes glowing with hate. Lyra's voice broke the silence, trembling but full of awe. "Why do you fight for us? Why risk everything for strangers?" Daniel's eyes stayed fixed on the dark forest. His voice was low, rough with memory. "Because I couldn't save my own family. I won't let death take yours too." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, the horn howled again. This time the sound came from all sides. They were surrounding the cabin completely. Daniel grabbed oil from a shelf and splashed it across the doorway. He struck a torch and set it alight. Flames roared upward, blocking the entrance in a wall of fire. The hunters outside hissed, their shadows pulling back. For now it would hold them. But not for long. "Go below," Daniel ordered, pointing to the cellar. "Take the twins. Stay silent." Lyra hesitated. "And you?" He tightened his grip on the axe, his jaw set like stone. "I'll keep them busy." Her throat tightened, but she obeyed. She hurried down the narrow steps into the dark cellar, clutching her children. The wooden hatch closed behind her, leaving Daniel alone with the fire and the waiting dark. The hunters screamed, their voices rising into the night. They hated fire, but they hated failure more. Soon the snow outside filled with shadows rushing toward the cabin again. The first broke through the flames, his armor smoking. Daniel swung the axe, cutting him down before he could step further. Another leapt through the window, rolling into the room. Daniel spun, striking with brutal force, sending him crashing into the table. The fight became chaos, steel clashing, wood splintering, fire spreading. Every strike of his axe carried fury. Every breath came with fire. Daniel fought not as a man defending a home, but as something greater, a force of pure will refusing to bend. His muscles burned, his arms shook, but he did not fall. Down in the cellar, Lyra held her children close, listening to the battle above. Every crash, every cry made her heart lurch. She whispered to her twins, tears slipping down her cheeks. He fights for us. He bleeds for us. Remember this night. Above, Daniel slammed his shoulder into the last of the wave, sending the hunter crashing into the flames. The body writhed, then stilled. Smoke filled the cabin, choking the air. Daniel coughed, staggering, his chest heaving. The floor was slick with blood, the walls blackened with soot, and then silence. For a heartbeat, the world seemed still. Daniel leaned against the wall, gripping his axe, his breath ragged. His body screamed with pain, but his spirit burned hotter than ever. The silence did not last. From outside, a deeper voice rose, a command sharp and cruel. The hunters had a leader, and he was not done. More shadows gathered, larger, stronger. This was not over. Daniel lifted his head, sweat and ash streaking his face. His voice was hoarse but steady. Come then, he whispered to the night. I'll be waiting. In the cellar, Lyra pressed her ear to the floorboards. She could hear his voice, hear his defiance. And in that moment, something shifted in her heart. He was not just a human stranger anymore. He was protector, warrior, hope itself. The hunters outside prepared for their next strike. The cabin was scarred, the fire burning low, but Daniel still stood. He would stand until his last breath if he had to, and the night was far from over. The night had become endless. The cabin walls bore scars of fire and blood. The floor was littered with broken wood, shattered glass, and the fallen bodies of hunters. Smoke curled toward the roof and the firelight flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows. Daniel stood in the middle of it all, his axe slick with blood, his body shaking from exhaustion. His breath came ragged, but his eyes burned with defiance. He had stood against wave after wave, and though he was battered, he was not broken. Outside, the snow-covered forest was alive with movement. More hunters gathered under the command of a tall, armored figure. Their leader. His glowing eyes burned with hate as he raised a curved blade high. He shouted in their tongue, his voice echoing across the night. The hunters roared in response. They were preparing for their final charge. In the cellar below, Lyra held her twins close. She could hear everything. The hunters' cries, the heavy steps outside, the weight of fate pressing down. Her heart ached, torn between fear and something stronger. She could not stay hidden while Daniel faced death alone. Carefully, she kissed her baby's foreheads, whispering a promise of safety. Then, with trembling hands, she laid them in the blankets and climbed back up. The hatch creaked open and Daniel turned his head. His face was pale, streaked with ash and blood. But when he saw her, a spark of fire lit his tired eyes. I told you to stay below, he said, his voice low but steady. I will not watch you die while I hide, Lyra whispered. She stood beside him, her body weak but her spirit strong. If this is the end, we face it together. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Together then. The horn blew again and the hunters charged. Snow sprayed into the air as their feet thundered across the ground. The leader's blade gleamed in the moonlight. Dozens of shadows surged toward the cabin. Daniel gripped his axe tighter, his muscles screaming in defiance. And then, something unexpected happened. From the forest behind the hunters came a second sound. The crack of branches, the pounding of many feet, a roar deep, powerful, alive. The hunters slowed, their eyes widening. Out of the darkness came figures cloaked in fur and armor, carrying spears tipped with fire. They were not enemies. They were outcasts, aliens like Lyra driven from their clans, hidden in the wild. And at their lead was a towering figure, scarred and strong. Enough, the newcomer bellowed. His voice rolled like thunder. You will not claim more blood tonight. The hunters faltered. Their leader snarled, raising his blade in defiance. But the outcasts poured forward, crashing into the hunters with a fury that lit the night. The forest erupted into chaos, steel against steel, fire against shadow. Inside the cabin, Daniel and Lyra watched in shock as the tide turned. The hunters, who had seemed unstoppable, now faced equal fury. The snow ran red, the air filled with shouts and screams. For the first time, hope pierced the darkness. Daniel staggered to the doorway, his axe still ready. One of the outcasts rushed past him, nodding with respect before joining the battle. Another stood guard at the cabin, protecting Lyra and the twins as if they were his own blood. The leader of the hunters roared, cutting through enemies with his curved blade. His eyes locked on the cabin. With terrifying speed, he charged toward Daniel, his blade raised high. Daniel met him at the threshold. The clash was brutal. Steel struck steel, sparks flying. Daniel's arms shook under the force, but he did not yield. The fight raged, each blow heavier than the last. At last, with a roar, Daniel swung his axe in a desperate arc. The blade met its mark. The hunter leader staggered, his weapon falling from his grip. With one final cry, he collapsed into the snow. The remaining hunters froze. Without their leader, their fury faltered. The outcasts pressed forward, driving them back into the trees. One by one, the hunters fled, swallowed by the dark forest. Silence returned, broken only by the crackling of fire and the ragged breaths of survivors. Daniel dropped his axe, falling to one knee. His body trembled, his chest heaving. Lyra rushed to his side, her hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. He looked at her, his face weary but alive. "We did it," he corrected. The outcast leader stepped forward, his scarred face solemn. He looked at Lyra and her twins, then at Daniel. Slowly, he bowed his head. "This human has fought for you. He has fought for us all. From this night on, he is one of us." The other outcasts echoed the gesture, lowering their weapons in respect. Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She had been cast out, hunted, left to die. But now here she saw something she thought she would never see again. A family, a people who would stand with her. The twins stirred in their blankets, letting out soft cries. Daniel and Lyra turned to them, their faces softening. The cabin, though scarred, was filled with warmth. For the first time in a long time, the future seemed possible. Daniel looked at the fire, at Lyra, at the twins. His voice was quiet but strong. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning," and so it was. On that frozen night in a cabin nearly destroyed, a legend was born. A human who stood against the hunters, an alien mother who refused to surrender, and two children who would grow to carry the memory of hope. The story of their survival would spread far beyond the forest, carried by whispers, retold by firelight. And in time, across the stars, it would become a tale of how one man's courage and one woman's strength changed everything. A new beginning had come.